Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. I'll just give it 1 or 2 more minutes. We've got all the speakers waiting, but let's just give it another minute for people to join. Just bear with us whilst people come into this fantastic webinar that we've got planned for you today. And about 2 minutes before this webinar started, the rescue dogs we've got 3 dogs, they went off like crazy. So they've been banished to a faraway corner. Touch wood, they won't escape from then. If they do, I will go on mute immediately. And then Robin will take over. But I think we might, if everyone's ready, I think we might get started because we've got some fabulous speakers. I don't want to take up too much time. But before I do, just welcome everyone and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on grievance mechanisms. Before I begin, I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we gather today. Me, myself, personally, I am fortunate enough to live and work in Currumbin Valley, which lies within the lands of the Yugambeh people, whose territory stretches all the way from the Logan River up north down to the Tweed River. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to extend this acknowledgement to all the lands from which you are all joining us today, recognizing the unique heritage and traditions of those places as well. Also, one quick note before we start, please note that this webinar will also be recorded because some people couldn't make it and would love to see the contents as well. Perfect. So I'm actually going to kick off here. I'm actually going to set the tone with some research and some data that Inform 365 has been collecting. So just let me quickly share my screen. 1 second, I've got too many windows open as always. There we go. Can everyone see my screen? Perfect. So I just wanted to provide a bit of background initially. There's some good research out there, and I just wanted to pick up 3 here.
Sorry to interrupt. You'll need to maximize the screen because we're currently seeing the presenter view.
Oh, right. Okay, I thought I had maximized it. I am going to do something very, very outrageous, and I'm just going to pull the pin on it because I've got another screen going there. Just give me 1 second. Let's do this. It worked when we tested it earlier this morning. Let's try this again. There we go. Robin, can you see my full screen now?
It's full screen data. Thank you.
Perfect. Appreciate that. So just wanted to share 3 pieces of research. Mekong Club back in 2022, they did some research on global companies in the retail and manufacturing space. And they reported that less than 50% of those companies actually had grievance mechanisms in place, despite 70% of them saying, hey, yeah, we're doing everything right. We've got grievance mechanisms. Macquarie University, closer to Australia, in Australia, they did a study on the top 25 Australian companies. In this case, only 10 of those had remedial mechanisms for external individuals and communities to raise any kind of human rights complaints. And then there was a joint sort of study between Better Sydney, KPMG, Property Council, and Inform 365 back in 2022 as well, where we looked at the property and construction sector. And again, there are certain aspects out there, but the implementation is quite fragmented and inconsistent. So that's just some of the research bits. There's hundreds of pieces of research that sort of all corroborate what I've put up here. But what I wanted to do as well here is look at some of the data that we've been collecting. And this is just a breakdown of organizations in one of our larger databases, and this is in the property sector, where we're tracking what are suppliers doing in the space around a whole bunch of modern slavery related metrics. But in this case, we've just looked at who has a grievance mechanism and who doesn't, and we've broken it into bands of revenue. As you can see, when you go above the 100 million mark, and that's to the right of the screen, it is almost universally adopted. And just quickly, a quick clarification, the two bars you see, one of them is 2019 and the other one's 2024. So you can see anything above 100 million, you can see that there's a pretty much a universal adoption of some kind of grievance mechanism. The smaller the organization is, the less grievance mechanisms are in place with organizations. But you can see some good trends. Even organizations with less than $500,000 revenue, we've seen a nice steady increase. A couple of notes to this slide. There's 12 times more suppliers in the 2024 database than there is in the 2019 database. And there are other aspects that we've seen some significant growth, but those aspects alone would be worth another webinar, and that's around allowing trade union representation, company hotlines, specific apps for staff. So there are some positives happening in the space, but some of the insights that we have seen here, and this is just some of the warning signs that we're sort of picking up, is there's a lot of good intentions, implementations are increasing, but if you look at, for instance, modern slavery statements, number of actual grievances that are mentioned in there is pretty much zero. So there's a bit of a disconnect between policy intentions and what's happening in the practice. Then there's also the second one, we need to have a concerted effort to uplift what we're doing at these levels to include the lower tiers as well. We need to ensure there is a consistent worker protection mechanism in place for entire supply chains and not just fragmented little pieces where things are working the way they should. That's setting the tone. I'll hand over to Robin for the next part of this webinar. Thanks very much.
And welcome everyone. My name is Robin Mellon. I am CEO of Better Sydney and work closely with a lot of organisations, including the Property Council, Inform 365 and the UN Global Compact Network Australia. I'm joining today from unceded Camaragal land, part of the beautiful Eora Nation. And what we're going to do is, as Nicholas has hinted, I'm going to provide a little bit of that sort of the context setting that underpins the data that Nicholas just shared. And then we're going to hear from three amazing speakers. We're going to hear from Natalie Maxwell-Davis from the Australian Red Cross, from Lauren Dale from Anti-Slavery Australia, and from Mark Taylor from the Issara Institute about different aspects and different forms of grievance mechanism. We will be recording the session today. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions. There's the Q&A button up top. Please do ask the Q&A. The Inform 365 clients and staff have provided some questions in advance, so we'll work through those, but we will leave time for questions at the end. So by way of an introduction, Nicholas was talking about grievance mechanisms. Many of you will know, what these mean in a lot of detail. But essentially, grievance mechanisms are all of the different types of systems used to raise, to assess, to investigate, and to respond to any concerns and feedback and complaints. And in this format, we're talking specifically about modern slavery grievance mechanisms, but there can be many forms. And when we talk about worker voice, you'll hear that term probably quite a bit during this webinar. We're talking about not just the inclusion, but the active participation of workers in the decision-making processes that affect them. And that isn't just a negative. That's not just when there are complaints or concerns. That can be a positive thing. So worker voice can be that positive leaning into workers having a decision-making role. And when Nicholas was talking about grievance mechanisms, he talked about trade unions or hotlines, but they can include informal channels, formal discussions, scheduled discussions, workers' forums, modern slavery hotlines or apps, and I know there's a lot more of those that have been rising up, Whistleblower tools, things that we might recognize as whistleblower tools for specific purposes. Company codes of conduct and complaints procedure, which may seem quite formalized, but also play an important role. There's also independent third-party providers, and some of your organizations might use those. They provide an outsourced third-party service. And there's worker voice platforms. As I mentioned, a way of including worker voices in that process. The trade union processes Nicola's mentioned, and importantly, industry certification bodies as well. So things like the cleaning accountability framework as well, and how they work closely with workers to certify workplaces. And then there's NGOs, non-government organisations. We'll be hearing from Lauren Dale and Anti-Slavery Australia, and then the statutory bodies, so the Human Rights Commission, but also procedures through courts and tribunals like the Fair Work Commission. I've seen Michael Tomlinson has his hand up straight away. Michael, did you have a question about this part, the introduction, or for the speakers? There's a hand come down there. I'm not sure whether that was an accidental hand, but we'll carry on. Otherwise, Michael, if you want to put questions into the Q&A, that would be amazing. I think the important part of this discussion, and before we get into hearing from these three experts, is that question that was asked in the invitation, in the webinar summary. What makes an effective grievance mechanism? And we'll be hearing about that from Natalie and Lauren and Mark. But essentially, there's a framework that we need to make sure. Firstly, it needs to be legitimate. People, the users, need to be able to trust the mechanism, and the provider needs to be accountable. People providing the grievance mechanism need to be accountable. Secondly, and this is really important, it needs to be accessible. So people need to know it exists. It's not enough just to have it, but it needs to be accessible. It needs to be communicated, and people need to be able to know they can receive assistance to access it if there are any barriers to access. Thirdly, it needs to be predictable. And this is important. The steps of the process need to be spelt out. Any grievance mechanism needs to have those steps, the timeframes, the decision-making that goes into the processes, and any possible outcomes spelt out. It also needs to be equitable. People, the users, need to be treated fairly and be able to access the information and the expertise to engage in that process in a fair and informed and respectful way. It also needs to be transparent. An effective grievance process needs to be transparent. So stakeholders, users, are informed about the process and given information about how effective the remedies are. It certainly needs to be rights compatible. It needs to be compatible with international human rights standards. And it needs to be a source of continuous learning. And this goes to probably the heart of a lot of the Modern Slavery Act and the reporting regime. It's not enough to just have a grievance mechanism and set and forget. It needs to be a source of continuous learning. And so learning from each grievance needs to go back into the formulation. And lastly, it needs to be based on dialogue and engagement. It's not okay for, I'm just going to say it, middle-aged white men in a boardroom to say, oh, we think this would make a jolly good grievance mechanism. It needs to be based on how will people use it, engaging with users, engaging with worker voice to work out how people, why people, when people would use it, so based on dialogue and engagement. And the last point that I wanted to make here is that, grievance mechanisms in their myriad of forms are not the end point. In many cases, for many people, they are just the beginning. The point at which people speak up and voice a concern, voice a risk, voice something that's happening to them or to colleagues or to friends or family, that is for many people the start of a very long process of remediation, which will involve, of course, safeguarding rights holders, safeguarding people and their human rights, identifying the harm and understanding the business's relationship or the organization's relationship with it. Using any leverage to try and affect change, to make things better, to change the business practices, making things right, and determining, of course, in each case, which of the modern slavery remedies are most appropriate. And then the last part, preventing harm by either changing or improving systems to make sure it can never happen again. So grievance mechanisms are not the end point. We got this many calls. They are in many cases the beginning of a long remediation process if that's to be effective. Now, I will stop there and hand over with great delight to Natalie Maxwell-Davis, somebody I'm delighted to work alongside, wearing hats. There is a bio for Natalie and for each of our speakers going up there in the chat. Natalie, tell us about your work, the work of the Australian Red Cross and grievance mechanisms.
Thank you, Robin. And I might just share screen if that's okay. So please tell me if this comes up appropriately.
Yes, that's up.
And you can all see it. Okay, great, super. And you're seeing the right presentation slides this time?
We are.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk to everyone. It's really good to talk about this topic. What I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about the work that Australian Red Cross does in this space, but then I want to talk about what we've learned from survivors of modern slavery about the importance of grievance mechanisms and what makes an effective grievance mechanism. Robin did steal my thunder a little bit in what he's just said, so you'll hear some repetition, but I hope that we can bring, by that listening to the voice of survivors, we can bring some really practical things that might help organisations improve their grievance mechanisms. Robin, keep me on time if I'm going over time. He looks happy about that. So Australian Red Cross has committed to work with the Australian government to promote a whole of community approach to modern slavery. As part of this work, we aim to increase awareness and understanding of modern slavery across the community, bringing that humanitarian perspective, the real impacts on people. One of the major parts of our program is we support people that have experienced modern slavery in Australia through the Support for Trafficked People program that we run on behalf of DSS. Another part of work that I want to talk about today, because it puts some context around what we're talking about, is the Work-Right Hub and why we developed the Work-Right Hub and how the Work-Right Hub could be used potentially to support grievance mechanisms. Other parts of our work are we are ourselves a reporting entity under the Modern Slavery Act. And finally, we support organisations to try and develop impactful and practical strategies to address modern slavery, informed by people with lived experience and our experience working with survivors and other people in situations that might increase their risk of vulnerability to modern slavery. So if you're not aware, the Support for Trafficking People program is part of Australia's whole of government approach to combat modern slavery. The main purpose of the program is to meet the safety, security and overall wellbeing needs of victim survivors whilst they recover from their experiences and to empower them to rebuild their lives. The support program is delivered by Red Cross in every state and territory, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we work very closely with the Australian Federal Police, the DPP, and many other pro bono services, including Anti-Slavery Australia. We currently have over 200 people on our support program, but we know that this is only the tip of the iceberg because until recently, to be referred to our program, you had to engage with Australian Federal Police, and that's a major impediment to referrals. So as of July last year, an additional referral pathway was implemented, but we're still only seeing that start to sort of come through. Another part of our work is the Work-Right Hub. The Work-Right Hub was developed with the support of the Australian Government Modern Slavery Grant and is Australia's first digital platform aimed at preventing and addressing forced labour in Australia. We developed the Work-Right Hub because people with lived experience of forced labour in Australia told us that to address modern slavery, people needed to have better understanding of their rights and access to safe and trusted channels to support, as Robin mentioned. The hub we developed in consultation with migrant workers and frontline responders, and we continue to develop it in consultation with migrant workers and frontline responders. The hub aims to support workers recognise the signs of labour exploitation, understand ways to protect themselves and find support. And you'll see that'll become a bit more important when I talk about it later. Oh, somebody's not seeing the slides on their screen. Can everybody else see them? Okay. That's good, thank you. The hub also aims to support frontline responders recognise and respond to modern slavery. So it can be used by frontline responders to help identify when there's risk and where they can best respond. We're constantly developing the hub, and we've recently launched sector-specific information for a range of sectors so people can find information that's relevant to their situation. Well, somebody else is not seeing it either. The Hub also has other information you might find helpful, like there's a pocket guide to responding safely, there's a modern slavery training package with a delivery guide, and an e-module. One of the key features of the WorkRight Hub is a decision tree, and the decision tree can help workers or frontline responders to work through the issues that they're experiencing and then connects them with the most appropriate support. The Hub also provides workers with information about what good work looks like. So tips for looking for a job, videos and flyers to support people resolving issues they might be experiencing. Oh, thank you for that. The Hub's currently available in 10 different languages, but we're in the final stages of testing a translation plugin. So hopefully it'll be available in more languages soon. The information from the Hub, while anonymous, can help us better understand modern slavery and inform our response. So it can help us identify where there may be certain risks occurring, and we can target our actions to address those concerns. It can also inform policy decisions. And the other thing I'd say is the Hub is available to you as something that you can use to support your response. So, you know, we've worked with a number of different companies where they have promoted the Hub out to their workers, and we're about to launch a big program with Australia Post around that. So now let's turn to grievance mechanisms specifically and what we've learnt from modern slavery survivors about the importance of grievance mechanisms and what makes an effective grievance mechanism. As Robin said, survivors have told us and confirmed that effective grievance mechanisms are crucial to identifying, preventing and responding to modern slavery. Survivors have said that empowering workers or those around them to speak up is one of the key ways to identify and prevent modern slavery. But they've also told us, as Robin said, that to empower workers, we need to ensure they understand their rights and have access to trusted, safe, effective channels for support. So simple statement, but I'd like to sort of unpack what that means from a survivor perspective a little bit. So the first part of an effective grievance mechanism in my mind is supporting people understand their rights. So, and people might be surprised to know that most people who come to the support program have never heard of the term modern slavery. And this is a problem because reporting modern slavery often requires self-identification. And if people aren't aware of it, they cannot self-identify and then they're unlikely to report. I'd also like to say when we talk about modern slavery, it's not just informing people about modern slavery, but providing them about details of their work rights. You know, survivors have told us that, and survivors and other workers have told us actually, that sometimes they're given basic details like pay rates, but they're not given more granular information, things about, you know, entitlements, right to breaks, overtime, sick leave and other factors. And this lack of knowledge of these factors can lead to deception and exploitation. Workers may be told they're receiving a certain salary, but then their employer erodes that salary through deductions for food, accommodation, overtime, mistakes at work or repaying a debt. And if people don't understand what appropriate work looks like, or if people around them don't understand that, they're not going to report it. So it's a really important factor to raise that awareness for reporting. The other part of important effective grievance mechanisms, as Robin alluded to, is awareness. People need to be aware of reporting channels, but they also need to be encouraged to use them. So through consultations that we've done with workers in different sectors, we've often found that people have observed indicators of modern slavery, but they didn't report it for a range of reasons. They might not want to get involved. They might be worried that they were wrong and it wasn't actually modern slavery, or they might be worried that they will get in trouble for it. So it's important to encourage people to report situations, even if they're unsure if it's modern slavery or an exploitative work situation. I suggest people encourage people to think about, you know, not what if I'm wrong if I report it, but what if I'm right? Like if I'm right, I might be helping someone. I think it's also important to make it really clear that there's no reprisals for reporting risks. And if you report something that's not wrong, it's actually just like, you know, you would report work health and safety issues. Another thing, Robin alluded to this as well, is that people need to be able to access reporting channels. So if people are in situations of modern slavery, their communications and movements are often heavily scrutinised. So they might not be able to access these channels or even information about these channels. And you can think about that in how you even promote your work channels. Like, can you put it on the back of a bathroom door where they might have the opportunity to look at it in private? You know, how can you integrate your reporting channels in the ways that workers themselves actually communicate? And I suspect Mark will talk a little bit about that because the Issara Institute's done some amazing work in that. And also, as Robin said, workers need to trust channels. If they don't trust it, they won't use it. For any of us reporting through reporting channels, there's often barriers to reporting, and this is only exacerbated when you're in a situation of exploitation. People will fear reprisals to them or their family. They might think that they have no alternative other than to, pursue the situation that they're in. They could fear deportation. It is really, really difficult for workers to come forward and report. However, you can overcome some of those challenges, and some of the things that Robin talked about are what workers are telling us as well, or survivors are telling us. So is there an option for them to report anonymously? Can you engage with an external provider that the workers trust to increase the trust in the channel? Another thing that workers have said is provide clear guidance around really specific information around what happens after they report. How long will it take? What will happen next? All of those things give workers increased confidence to use the channels.
You've got a 1-minute warning.
Oh, that means I'm going to have to talk really quickly. Well, then I'd like to say quickly, and I won't touch on this because I do want to go to 2 other things, is if reports are raised, you need a plan to deal with them. There's no point having a reporting channel and not having a plan to deal with it. You need to be able to respond in a really effective manner, putting the worker at the centre of the response. We know when reporting channels are effective that workers find out and they'll use them, so think about that. So because I've got 1 minute, I just want to skip to this. And here are 7 things I think you can do to help improve your reporting channels. Provide workers information about their rights. Do so in a way that and from sources that they trust. Sites like the Work Right Hub and other sites can help that. Then my next point is change the language. Let's not talk about modern slavery. Let's talk about exploitative work practices, which can lead to or include modern slavery. Recognize the fact that, an incident might be reported, might not look like modern slavery to start with. Raise awareness of reporting channels and encourage people to report. Like I say to organisations, encourage your staff. If it feels wrong, report it. Then you've done your job. Then I'd say break down those barriers to reporting. Anonymous reports, providing information about how reports will be handled. Meet workers where they're at. Ensure you have the capability and the capacity and the processes to respond, making principled approaches, making sure that you put the workers' safety at the centre. And as Robin said, engage workers in the review of your reporting channels and try and create a safe space for them to give you honest feedback about what they really think. Are they aware of them? Do they trust them? Will they use them? And if you need to engage with third parties that workers trust to do that, that's a really good way to do it. And finally, one of the things that we didn't touch on is really support suppliers. How can you work with suppliers to lift the bar together? We tend to continue to burden suppliers with more and more requirements, but really, how can we support them? And I was interested to see at the start what Nicholas said about smaller suppliers with grievance mechanisms, because our feedback from survivors is, this often happens in small companies that are beyond the scrutiny. And I know I'm done, but I just wanted to leave everybody with one final message that has come from survivors we've consulted recently, and I find it really moving. Survivors have said they want people to understand that modern slavery happens in Australia. And if you think someone is being exploited, don't ignore it. Speak up, because your actions can make a huge difference. Thank you. And I will try and stop sharing.
Thank you, Natalie. That was amazing and really good to get those survivor voices, or people with lived experience of modern slavery, those voices really clear in your message. I'm going to pass straight to Lauren Dale from Anti-Slavery Australia. Lauren, tell us a bit about the work of Anti-Slavery Australia and My Blue Sky as well. Your screen.
Can you see my screen? You have all disappeared from my screen. So if anybody wants to interrupt me, please speak up, because all your faces have gone.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you. So thanks for letting me share some insights from Anti-Slavery Australia. I'm actually joining over here in WA on Wadandi country. I do acknowledge it's a bit of a one-way street for the next 10 minutes. So thank you in advance for letting me talk at you. I promise I'll make it count. If you're not already familiar with the work that Anti-Slavery Australia does, we were started in 2003 by our director, Professor Jennifer Byrne, to provide free legal services to support survivors. That's still predominantly a lot of the work that we do, but we also do research and advocacy and policy. We have a research fellow, publish journal articles. We conduct education and training. That includes to businesses, but also to frontline workers and communities. We're really proud of the work that we've done. Since 2003, we've provided free legal advice to thousands of clients. They've come from over 40 countries, speak 23 different languages. We've secured more than 1.6 million in victims' compensation and secured visas for hundreds of clients. So we're very proud of that. In terms of the legal services that we provide, we consistently have about 400 clients. And these come from a variety of forms of modern slavery. And essentially the work that we do is very wraparound. This includes migration, employment, victims of crime compensation, family law. There's a little snapshot there, as you can see. Everyone is welcome to refer to us, including businesses. And it's really important that our legal assistance is trauma-informed, culturally safe and rights-based. And I will come back to this in a bit, but essentially that means that it's about informed consent, people understand options and have time to make decisions, time to build trust. And we need to be sure of confidentiality, use interpreters, both telephone and face-to-face. So that is all really important to us. And also, as Robin mentioned, we have My Blue Sky. This is Australia's national forced marriage helpline. And it also provides people in or at risk of forced marriage with important information and links to support services and resources. So essentially, what I want to do is, having had that background about our experience, share our insights into designing grievance mechanisms, but importantly, what happens after that? What happens after someone speaks to you and where that leads to? So I want to just use a hypothetical. This is based in Australia, but it can apply to any jurisdiction. And I'm hoping that it will ground some of what everyone has said so far in an example, especially all the insights that Natalie has just shared. So imagine you've arrived in Australia on a temporary visa. You're working in a warehouse, you're assembling for a large Australian retailer. You might work for a labour hire subcontractor. You're paid a fee to an agent in your home country for this job. So now you're in debt and your family is relying on you to send money home. You were told you'd be earning $25, but now that you're here, you're making far less. You might be charged accommodation and transport, and it brings your earnings to nothing. Your hours are long. If you complain, you're dropped from the roster. Your contract might be in English, but you don't speak it very well. Your passport is held, but for safekeeping, and you're told you can't speak to anyone, especially not the client. Otherwise, your family will be in trouble. And it might go on for months or years. You might hear that this client Australian retailer has some kind of process for raising concerns. It might be on their website. Maybe someone mentioned it during induction, or they've paid a site visit. So one day you get a chance to Google it. You see this speak up form or speak out or a similar form and a phone number. And you might be thinking, if this goes badly, I'll lose everything. But if I stay silent, maybe I can keep working. I don't even know what to call what is happening to me. Is it wrong? Is it illegal? Is it just how it is? Maybe the person I'm meant to report is the one who controls my hours, my wages, my food, my visa. And maybe you do decide to go through with it, but instead you realize the form's in English, the hotline has hold music, your phone doesn't have credit. It's really impersonal and you might not go through with it. As we've heard already, people won't report if they don't know how to, if they don't feel safe doing so. Anti-Slavery Australia support people experiencing serious exploitation, and many of whom don't know their rights or don't know how to safely seek help. And you would have also heard Natalie say the exact same thing. For someone facing modern slavery, the decision to self-report carries risk, especially for vulnerable groups like migrants. Almost all face practical and psychological barriers to speaking up, and it's not just retaliation, although that's part of it. It's the complexity of their situation, their uncertainty, their debt, their visa, lack of options. And very often it's that lack of trust that reporting will lead to anything. In designing grievance mechanisms, of course, businesses should apply the UNGP's effectiveness criteria. But at its heart, I think the question to ask is, would I report if I were in their position? And like I mentioned, at Anti-Slavery Australia, our work is trauma-informed. And this means that recognising disclosure carries risk. Past experiences might have told someone that these systems can't be trusted. And trauma-informed is based on 6 core principles, and all are very relevant to designing grievance mechanisms in a modern slavery context, many of which overlap with the UNGP's effectiveness criteria. So this includes safety, trustworthiness, and transparency. There's no quick turnaround. Trust takes time to build. It's choice, including from a legal perspective. Mechanisms can't compromise other legal pathways. Collaboration, empowerment, cultural, historical, and gender responsiveness, and you also would have heard about that includes accessibility, not just availability. This means multilingual, offline, and community-based options. These principles aren't add-ons. They're what makes raising modern slavery grievances and speaking up possible in the first place. And you don't need to be a big multinational to be able to implement these principles. All businesses of all sizes can do so. And most importantly, when people do speak up, it needs to lead somewhere. Grievance mechanisms should be capable of closing the loop through remedy, referral, meaningful engagement. So let's say you do fill out the form and you press submit and someone gets back to you. The company, this large retailer, they thank you for raising the concern, tell you your report's taken seriously, and you'll hear back an update within 5 business days. After some internal assessment and a few questions, they confirm that technically they didn't cause or contribute to your exploitation, but they do acknowledge that they are directly linked to it through their business relationships. So they say, look, we've taken action, we've contacted the supplier, and we've encouraged them, we've used our leverage to resolve the issue. But the supplier you work for doesn't want to do that. Your boss tells you you'll never see the money you're owed. He tells others not to talk to you. Management begins to monitor everyone's phone calls. And then quietly you hear that the client, the company you reported to, has decided to end their relationship. So you're left without remedy and the grievance is closed. And in our hypothetical, let's say after all this, you do get connected with a legal service. Maybe someone at a community organisation gives you a number for Anti-Slavery Australia. You speak to a lawyer who listens and believes you, and you tell them that at the end of the day, you don't mind about getting an apology or a prosecution. You just want financial compensation for the harm and return home to your family. But here's where things start to unravel again. Australia has a state duty to protect human rights under the UNGPs. We've also committed to providing effective remedy to survivors of modern slavery, but the system really fails to meet these commitments. If you want to apply for compensation, the first question isn't what happened to you, it's where. Because under Australia's current system, you're not applying under one national scheme, you're applying under a patchwork of state and territory schemes. Each have their own eligibility criteria, definitions of harm, maximum amounts, different rules about time limits and evidence. And if you were moved between work sites in different states, you might need to apply under multiple jurisdictions. And not all states recognise the more subtle forms of coercion involved in modern slavery, like threats to your family overseas. And there's also a federal option under Section 21B of the Crimes Act, but that requires a conviction, and convictions in modern slavery cases are very, very rare. Even if there is a conviction, it means you have to wait until the end of your criminal trial. There's a high standard of proof, and the process can be really re-traumatizing. So what does it all mean practically? It means that even if you speak up, even with legal support, and what happened to you is clearly wrong, there's often no clear, accessible path to compensation. And that's
Lauren,
a gap.
This is a 60-second warning for you.
Beautiful. Well, I have one slide left, so it's awesome. And it's a gap a national compensation scheme would fill. We've really been long campaigning for a national compensation scheme through our Justice for All project. Anti-Slavery Australia has designed a model for this. It includes things like funding and standard of proof. We're not the only ones that support this. A national compensation scheme has been recommended by multiple stakeholders, by the Law Council of Australia, the Human Rights Commission, Investors Against Slavery and Trafficking, special rapporteurs. Businesses have a responsibility to respect, but if a business is unable or unwilling to provide for or cooperate in remediation, a national compensation scheme would complement this remediation efforts. So we've launched a joint business statement urging businesses to sign on, and we encourage you to sign on to support this key reform. The statement is confidential. We won't share the signatories publicly, but we will engage with the government post-election. But it also doesn't preclude you from taking further steps. You're more than welcome to sign this joint statement and report on it in your modern slavery statement. You can collaborate with us on sector-specific engagement. You can continue conversations about what effective remedy looks like. This is a practical and principled reform, and a business support is essential. If we want survivors to come forward, we need to show them that when they do, something happens. So in short, our experience has shown us that grievance mechanisms only work if people can use them, that they're effective. But more importantly, people need to trust that something will happen when they do. So that's it from me. I really thank you for listening. I know it's an uncomfortable topic sometimes. It's a lot of talking, but I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. And I've shared in the chat the link to your business support for a national compensation scheme letter. Thank you for that. Now, let's go to Mark Taylor from the Issara Institute. Mark, thank you for joining us today. Tell us about your work and the importance of the worker voice, I guess, both nationally and internationally.
Great. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to spend time with you this morning or this afternoon. So my name is Mark Taylor. I am a senior director at the Issara Institute. We're a nonprofit organization based in Asia and the United States, tackling issues of human trafficking and forced labor through worker voice, through partnership, and through innovation. Let's bring this up to full screen. There we go. Thank you. So Issara has extensive experience, working and supporting both workers and business. We, have worker voice systems, grievance mechanisms, work on recruitment fee remediation, system strengthening, and just better tech and data. And so our work and approaches use both high-tech and low-tech solutions. And, as we've heard from both Natalie and Lauren, and, the importance of building trust with workers through that process. So really, how can we be inclusive? How can we empower workers in this process and really support job seekers across all tiers of the global supply chain? So the way that Issara operates, is in across Asia and expanding to other different geographies, is one through collaboration with global buyers. So you can see on the left here, just to give you a quick example, we have a couple great collaborations with Australian-based businesses. We're really actively looking to seek and to grow this out. And also on the right-hand side, we also collaborate with local organizations as well. So fellow nonprofit organizations, local trade unions, in overseas supply chains. This also includes both when we're talking about foreign migrant workers who, has already been identified as, populations that can be at higher risk and more vulnerable to exploitation. This often occurs both in the origin and the destination countries when workers are going abroad for those job opportunities. And so, what you see here on the right is an example of just the logos of just civil society organizations, local trade unions. Some of these have their own worker voice channels. Some do not. In those cases, Issara will be, they can go ahead and use some of our own systems. But what's important, I think, is to highlight is the importance of supporting channels and mechanisms that workers already trust, if they're well functioning. How can we uplift and support, through collaboration, rather than, I think, what sometimes you see is, initiatives that come in to try to or end up actually displacing existing systems. So we really want to encourage and promote greater collaboration amongst actors, amongst organizations already built into the fabric of where workers are living and operating, whether that's an origin or destination. So for Issara, we've been around for 11 years. We have a number of different ways that we're directly engaging with workers, addressing different issues that come up, building trust, and really, getting better data. And so for us, this is a combination, as I mentioned, of both high tech and low tech, because it's very important to make sure that, one, that you're being inclusive of all different workers. So you can think about, across different genders, across different nationalities, perhaps it's different shifts, different tools and ways that some workers may be more comfortable, being able to communicate further via their smartphone, or maybe they're more comfortable on social media platforms, closed Facebook chats, while others, prefer more traditional sort of in-person, face-to-face engagements. And so over the years, Issara has built out a whole range of different worker voice channels to make sure that we can safely engage, and hear from workers about what's of importance to them. It's important that, that these are in their native language, these different channels. We run this all in-house. So we have many team members that are of the same nationality of the workers, as well as the businesses who we're collaborating with. And part of this also, it's really important that, that issues, as has been discussed, as they come through the different worker voice channels, that, we take an empowerment approach. So workers know what their rights are. They know what their options are. We determine, is Issara well placed to go ahead and address these different issues? If not, there's referral mechanisms that can take place. Perhaps workers who just want to know what their options are, what their rights are, and maybe sometimes they just want, just advice, and they're trying to access the employer's own grievance mechanism. So as Issara is an independent grievance mechanism that works in parallel with the supplier's own grievance mechanisms, one of the important things that we also really are trying to foster is how can suppliers have better grievance mechanisms themselves? So, part of the aim in this process is not only to have good outcomes for workers and to be able to surface and address different issues, it's also how we can help the supplier basically proactively build better systems themselves. And so we often ask workers, have they used their employer's grievance mechanism? If so, what was the response? Or why are they contacting Issara? If not, why not? Because we know a lot of workers are very nervous about sharing any negative information or feedback to the employer because of fear of reprisals. And, as you can get more and more information to better understand, the rationale or the thinking, that can be fed back to an employer as well, so that they can take additional steps to build stronger and more well-functioning grievance mechanisms. So all told, over the last, 11 years, Issara has really, made a lot of strides in terms of opening up the number of ways that we're engaging, making sure that that's inclusive, that there are safeguards in place, and up to the point today where we're operating one of the largest independent worker voice channels globally, receiving 15 to 20,000 calls and messages and upwards per month. One of the things that also comes up as well, as we're, rolling out these different worker voice channels, we keep this open as well too. So it's not limited to just the workers in specific supplier sites of those global brands and retailers who we're collaborating with. It's important that we are, just from our own mission, that we're open to all workers. And so, how information then can get actioned and the different leverage you might have, there may be different approaches depending if it's, in supply chain, so to speak, or outside as well. But one of the areas that I think which really, hit home for us is that there's a worker voice, is really critical, just given the alternatives that are out there and the ability for, I think, a lot of issues to come to light. We consistently are operating in locations where there have already been social audits that have taken place. And a lot of times, it's a difficult ask, I think, for an auditor to come in point in time just for a few days to be able to build that trust with workers. So we're not anti-audit, but I think the reality is what we're often seeing, and you can hear more and more in the public discourse, is that it can be quite challenging to basically, really have a pulse on what is happening in the workplace. But when you have worker voice that's well functioning and rolled out and inclusive and workers feel comfortable with it, that visibility and your ability to act upon that information changes drastically. And so for Issara, we've been able to support remediation for over 500,000 workers over the past 3 years. So that's a lot of remediation, but that's not Issara doing all that. I mean, what that really is workers being strong to be able to feel comfortable to share their information, and the Issara team, as we're basically, actioning that information through what we call our inclusive labor monitoring platform, to work collaboratively with suppliers who are the duty bearers and have the responsibility for actioning that information to have better outcomes. So it's showing that workers are willing to speak up if there are better systems in place that they trust, that suppliers are able to go ahead and address many different types of issues, but they need to have visibility of it. In many cases, they don't, because workers may be nervous to share. And through that process, if you're able to stay in touch with workers to make sure that, during the investigation process or the different protocols and steps that suppliers have, that's being, done fairly and it's not going sideways, there's not reprisals. So I think one of the other strengths of having, these worker voice channels and systems in place is that you're continuously hearing from workers throughout that whole remediation process. You have the ability to step in and assist, whether it's to the worker or the supplier. And then ultimately, you can actually get validation from workers about how their remediation went. And so we're looking at different metrics around the quality of remediation across all these different issues. We categorize it by 5 high-level categories of labor issues, and there's 89 subcategories. You can start looking at the timeliness across all of resolution across all those different categories and subcategories, and how open the suppliers are. So there's a lot of real meaningful and interesting data that can accrue through this process, not only about how do you remediate, but also how is the supplier performance looking over time, and can we give more recognition and support for suppliers that are actually taking positive actions and steps to address issues. So it's not only about just are there issues in the first place, but how is the business responding to those as well.
Mark, we have a 1 minute.
Right, thank you. And so, ultimately that can, yield better information to make more informed decisions. If you're interested, you can go to workervoices.org. So this is a website that basically is put together through a collaboration of NGOs. So it's Issara and many of the partners that are on this ILM system who have their own worker voice channels, and we've aggregated and anonymized the data, and you can start looking into, by different nationalities of workers, by different geographies, what's happening in the remediation space across, issues such as the topics of, top 10 labor abuses, reported violations, how things are getting remediated, and look at different changes over time. One last thing I also did want to highlight as well is because recruitment risk, is very high across, so many different supply chains, especially where there's foreign migrant workers or sometimes just national workers as well too, that are moving from one location to another. With worker voice, you have the ability not only to be supporting stronger recruitment systems by hearing from workers throughout their journey, including sort of at that first mile before workers have even left, but you can be pushing out brokers, or illegal brokers during the process. And so, there's a lot of interesting data and so on, but, through collaboration, it's just exciting, in terms of addressing a lot of the pain points that not only, workers are facing through deception, through their own vulnerabilities, but these are the same pain points that suppliers are facing in many cases when they're trying to have more responsible recruitment, and of course, global buyers who want to have more responsible supply chains. So worker voice and that remediation process, can carry through the entire process. So I'll stop right there. I'll put in some other resources as well in the chat around what makes effective grievance mechanisms, based on all the different worker voice data, as well as worker voice and supply chains. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That was amazing. And I noted that Brighton had dropped the workervoices.org link into the chat box there. But thank you. There's a couple of questions come through already. A question I'm going to ask Nat first and then go across to Lauren. Natalie, does the work of the Australian Red Cross support people's applications for the workplace justice visa if they're pursuing grievances?
So it's probably a better question for Lauren to answer, because Red Cross provides holistic casework support working with other partners. So if there is a legal issue or a visa-related issue, they're referred on to usually Anti-Slavery Australia.
Thank you.
Well, in
So,
that case, taking that cue, yes, we do have a team of migration lawyers, so we do assist in preparing workplace justice visa applications, and we have supported a number of clients through this process recently since it's come into place. We also represent clients. I know Moe also asked about complaints to the Fair Work Ombudsman, so we do assist in that, although we haven't had much experience with the Fair Work Commission.
Okay. I saw a couple of questions. Question, can you share any examples of Australian companies that have successfully implemented effective grievance mechanisms, and what made them work well? I might go Natalie, Lauren, Mark. Natalie, any examples?
Yes, and I think Lauren's got some other examples as well. It's a really good question. Thank you, Holly. One of the things that we've seen is that organisations engaging with their workers and engaging with a third-party organisation that has the trust of those workers to try and get an understanding of the grievance, their workers' awareness of the grievance mechanism, their willingness to report, what sort of issues they've seen and whether or not they reported through that. And then that was then used as a workshop for their steering committee to test their response processes. So it's work in progress, but it was one of the ways that I think that we can effectively engage workers to improve grievance mechanisms.
Thank you. Lauren and Mark, anything to add there? Any examples?
Yeah, it's very difficult to pinpoint exact companies because, of course, everyone's a work in progress, but know that AXI and Pillar 2 a couple of years ago looked at modern slavery statements and only 10% had identified steps to ensure their grievance mechanisms were effective. So the pool is very small. I will say that if you do take time to conduct an effectiveness review of your grievance mechanism, you're already ahead of the pack. So doing something like that is a very good way to ensure that they can be successfully implemented.
Thank you. And Mark, any examples?
Yeah, we have a number of different, great progressive, businesses. I'll use Woolworths Group as an example as well too, since based in Australia. We're collaborating with them in their overseas supply chain in Southeast Asia to help suppliers have better grievance mechanisms and to increase visibility and to have worker voice. And so I would just two quick things I'd say on that, and this is not just for Woolworths Group, but just in general, is one, in terms of, corporates, retailers, buyers' policies, it's really important and helpful to have, be encouraging alignment with UNGPs, HRDD, other aspects where, we can incentivize and support suppliers to have the resources and tools in partnerships on the ground to help advance their work. Because a lot of times there's policies, but how that gets communicated or cascaded down in different steps that businesses can take is sometimes there's a bit of a gap. And then secondly, I would also say that, in terms of grievance mechanisms and policies, it's, yes, it's helpful to ensure that or to try to, advance that, but to make sure that you're also capturing metrics about, is it actually effective? Is it yielding, real results? Do workers trust it? And so, as you're exploring different options, because I think, as you mentioned in the beginning, Robin, there are different tools and solutions out there. At the end of the day, workers should have the ability to choose the different, shiny tech objects or non-tech objects that's most useful to them. And there should be sort of monitoring and tracking about, is that leading to real impact or not? Thanks.
So I've seen the same question come in online there that we actually had from one of the Inform 365 clients and staff. So I might just come to each of you in turn. Question is, how should organizations measure the effectiveness of their grievance mechanisms, and what metrics should be used or could be used? Natalie, Lauren, Mark, any idea on how do we measure the effectiveness and what metrics are good?
Sorry,
you go, Mark. You go, Mark, because we'll go in reverse.
Yeah, no, just because it sort of continues on that same thread. I mean, I think at the end of the day, is that leading to meaningful change? Are you able to track, progress? And is it being used? There's reach metrics and touch metrics, that's important, but if is it yielding real results? And so a big part of that is it driving remediation, and are you able to see some meaningful change and done in a way that's, has those safeguards in place for workers too? So I think that's one of the things we look at.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I also think it's qualitative and not just quantitative metrics. To, you can say we've distributed it to this number of suppliers, or we know that we've done training on our grievance mechanism for this number of people. But I think qualitative information is very good. Feedback on whether people have had increased awareness on what to do. So that's equally as important.
I agree with what both people have said, and think you can think about it at different stages of the process as well. Like, are people aware? Are they using it? Can you respond effectively? How long does it take you to respond? If you're not getting any, when I talked about not just modern slavery, but labour exploitation and other issues. If you're not getting any reports through your grievance mechanisms, big chances they're not actually working.
Thank you. And we're currently working, I've just put that in the chat, we're currently working on a document called Metrics for Impact and Success that should be released in June, but that is looking at, going beyond just reporting. How do we know if we're making a difference on people's lives? One last question, which I will fire to each of our amazing speakers before I hand back to Nicholas. How do we support the work of the Australian Red Cross, of Anti-Slavery Australia, of the Issara Institute? Natalie, how do we support what you do?
Go and have a look at the WorkRight Hub, use the WorkRight Hub, give us feedback on, the WorkRight Hub of what you'd like to see. We have worked with some organisations, as I said, who are promoting the WorkRight Hub in their own work sites, in the work sites of their suppliers or their partners. So it's available.
Thank you, Lauren.
People can refer to Anti-Slavery Australia, and we encourage businesses to do so to make sure that there's holistic support and collaboration. None of us work in silos. Businesses don't work alone. So please reach out and engage with us, and we're happy to work with you however you wish.
Thank you. And Mark.
Great, thank you. For us, it's about partnerships. So just like as Lauren mentioned, and Natalie as well too. So if you have if you're interested in engaging your overseas supply chain, we'd love to go ahead and speak with you. Similarly, we're also looking at different opportunities, for collaborations within Australia as well too. So please reach out if there's interest, and we can be of assistance.
Thank you so much. So yes, refer people to these extraordinary services. Please do make sure that they are communicated and used and supported, and donate where you can as well. I will hand back to Nicholas, but thank you so much. That has been incredibly informative. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. In particular, just love to thank our fabulous speakers, Natalie, Robin, and Mark and Lauren. Just as a side note, this is all part of Inform 365's ongoing mission to connect the dots within the ESG space. If you have any questions or would like to continue the conversation, please don't hesitate to reach out. And we all are looking forward to seeing how each of you take this knowledge forward to fairness and ethical behavior, not only in your respective organizations, but beyond that into your supply chain. So again, thanks for your interest in it. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and take good care of yourselves.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well done.